I never thought that one business trip could ruin everything. My name is Bryn, and I'm 34 years old. Looking back, I realize how fragile my little perfect world was, and how one stupid decision could destroy years of marital trust and carefully constructed appearances. Mark and I have been married for 11 years. On the outside, we look like the ideal suburban couple, with 2 kids, a nice, well-kept home in a quiet neighborhood. He worked for a company, I managed our house, telling people that they couldn't see the cracks beneath the surface. I've always been impulsive, but not in a dramatic way. Just in those fleeting moments when I make decisions without thinking, like going on a shopping spree online, deciding at the last minute to go on a girls' weekend, or, as in this case, attending a work meeting that was anything but professional. My 8-year-old son Ethan and 5-year-old daughter Emma have no idea what changes are coming. They are my everything, but somehow I forgot. In a moment of weakness or self-deception, I told myself it was just excitement. The meeting was in Chicago, at least that's what I told Mark. I felt suffocated, tired of the daily chores of suburban motherhood, tired of being a wife. I wanted something, anything, to make me feel like the old me again. Before the kids were born, before the constant laundry, lunches to prepare, and PTA meetings. At first, I flirted with a man I met in the hotel bar, but it soon went further. I knew it was wrong. I knew exactly how wrong it was. But at that moment, I didn't care. The weeks after Mark found out about my affair were full of tension, silent therapy sessions, and whispers. When the children weren't around, he was very organized, collecting financial documents, consulting divorce lawyers, planning the next move. I didn't realize how vulnerable I was. As a stay-at-home mom, I had no real income of my own. Every penny came from Mark. Every credit card, every utility bill, every grocery purchase, all in his name. I had been so focused on maintaining our picture-perfect life that I had never considered what would happen if it all came crashing down. By then, Jack had long since left. Those passionate moments seemed like a distant dream. He wasn't interested in messy divorces, 2 kids, and complicated situations. A man like him was good at creating excitement, but not interested in the consequences. Mark had always been a good provider, a reliable, stable investment banker. Although he worked long hours, he made sure that we were well provided for. Apart from being reliable, he didn't excite me or make my heart beat faster. Jack in the hotel bar was different. He was 39, a freelance photographer, and there was something about him that made me feel alive. When I looked at him, I wasn't just Mark's wife or the mom who always remembered to buy snacks. The first night I was with him, I told myself it was just drinks and harmless conversation, but we both knew where things were heading. The electricity between us was undeniable. That night, I made a choice that I knew would change everything. I didn't think Mark would find out, but I was careful who knew. I thought I was using disposable apps, creating fake email accounts, making sure our texts were always deleted, but my actions must have raised his suspicions. That night, everything fell apart. I was mowing the lawn when Mark walked in. His expression was different, calm, but with an icy edge I had never seen before. "We need to talk," he said, and those 4 words never bode well in a marriage. He had tracked my phone, he knew about the hotel, he knew about Jack, and what he didn't know was that somehow he had screenshots, texts, proof of everything, of my carefully woven lies, which instantly fell apart. He asked how long it had been going on. His voice was unnervingly quiet. I didn't even dare to look at him. The children were in the next room watching cartoons, completely unaware that a nuclear explosion was about to detonate in the living room. Mark had started sleeping in the spare room. The children sensed something was wrong, but we pretended everything was fine. During family meals, Ethan and Emma chattered away, completely unaware that an earthquake was about to hit. One morning, I found a stack of papers on the kitchen counter. It was the divorce papers. The papers were organized in an orderly manner, just like Mark. He had already spoken to a lawyer and planned out how custody and assets would be divided. I realized then that I had completely misjudged everything. My impulsiveness, my belief that I could have something exciting without having to bear the consequences. It all revealed the most frightening part, that I was completely financially dependent on a man. I had just destroyed trust completely. My mother had always warned me not to take things for granted, never to put all my eggs in one basket. Those were her words, but I rolled my eyes, confident that I had everything under control. Now they echoed in my head like a cruel reminder. Mark was counting. He had already spoken to our financial advisor, freezing the joint accounts and methodically protecting his assets. I had painfully discovered that I had no personal credit history. For years, I had been a housewife, financially invisible. The children were starting to notice my nervousness. Emma draws these heartbreaking family pictures of me and Mark separated by wide spaces. Ethan has become quieter and more withdrawn. I know I have destroyed not only my marriage, but the very foundations of our family. Jake is now just a distant memory. The affair in Chicago seems like a ridiculous fantasy. He doesn't want to complicate things. He doesn't want to marry a woman with 2 children and a broken marriage. Men like him are good at creating passion, but unable to deal with the consequences in real life. Mark hands me the papers at breakfast in front of the children. His calmness is more terrifying than any anger. Cold-blooded, he has already consulted the best divorce lawyer in the county, and I am about to discover that I have completely misjudged everything. I want full custody. He said that your indiscretion changed everything when the children were in the other room. The word indiscretion made my affair sound like a minor social faux pas, but we both knew it was far more than that. My first meeting with Mark's lawyer was a rude awakening. I was completely unprepared. I sat there feeling small and exposed as they discussed my entire life, as if I was some liability. My ignorance became painfully obvious. I knew nothing about investments, property ownership, or even the basic details of a joint account. Mark managed everything, while I was content to live in a bubble of suburban comfort and luxury. In one of the rare conversations Mark had with me, he said bluntly, "You need to get a job." The words hung in the air like a challenge. I hadn't worked full-time for more than 9 years, and my last professional experience had been as a part-time marketing assistant. The children had not been well before we had Ethan. Emma would suddenly burst into tears and ask why Daddy wasn't sleeping in the same room. Ethan had started to underachieve at school, get into fights, and become withdrawn. I knew it was my fault, but I couldn't admit it. My family had turned its back on me. Only my sister Maria was willing to talk to me. "You made your bed," my mother said coldly when I called for support. "Now you must lie down." Mark was methodical. He had already hired a top divorce lawyer and started documenting everything in preparation for a custody battle that would minimize my time with the children. Reality crushed my impulse. Those stolen hours in Chicago had once excited me, but now they were destroying everything I knew. The next few months were a brutal wake-up call. Mark was strategic. He began documenting my every move, gathering evidence to paint me as an unstable mother. Text messages, bank statements, social media activity, nothing was off limits. I tried to contact Jack for some kind of support, but he completely ignored me. The passionate nights in Chicago felt like distant, almost embarrassing memories. People like him were good at creating short-term excitement, not long-term consequences. The economic reality hit me the hardest. I had spent years shopping online, going on expensive vacations, and buying designer clothes without ever really understanding our finances. Mark had always been in charge of managing the finances, and I had been content living in a bubble of suburban comfort. My first interview was a disaster. A part-time marketing position would barely cover the cost of childcare. The interviewer was a woman in her 40s who could hardly hide her judgment as she looked over my CV. 9 years as a stay-at-home mom had basically erased my professional identity. Emma started having nightmares and woke up crying, asking why Mommy and Daddy weren't in the same room. Ethan is becoming more and more withdrawn. His grades are slipping. I know I have destroyed our family, but I can't admit it. Mark is calculating. He has already hired a top divorce lawyer and is portraying himself as a stable, responsible father. He is meticulously planning every step to reduce the time I spend with the children. The worst thing is that I am completely dependent on a man I have just completely betrayed. The courtroom feels like a strange planet. cold and lifeless. Mark, sitting opposite me, looked like he had been carved from granite. Our entire marriage was being dissected. Every mistake, every moment of weakness laid bare for judgment by a stranger in a black robe. A stern woman in her 50s kept looking at me with a mixture of disappointment and pity. I could read her thoughts clearly. Another impulsive woman had thrown away a perfect marriage, abandoned her perfect marriage for a moment of excitement. Mark's lawyer presented the evidence like a prosecutor. Bank statements showing my impulsive online shopping sprees, screenshots of deleted text messages, hotel receipts from Chicago. Each document was like another nail in the coffin. "Mrs. Harrison," the mediator said, "can you explain why you think you should retain joint custody of the children?" I stammered. The truth was that I had no convincing arguments. My affair, my financial irresponsibility, the complete lack of stability in my career, it all weighed against me. Mark sat there, completely calm. His lawyer had built a case that portrayed me as an unstable, unfaithful wife, possibly a threat to the children's mental health, and worst of all, a lot of what they said was true. Only my sister Maria seemed to understand the complexity of my situation. She later told me that it wasn't just about the affair, but about feeling neglected for years, losing myself in the marriage, losing myself. But understanding doesn't change the consequences, and those consequences were about to become very real. The final court hearing left me feeling vague. Mark stood there composed, while I felt like I was suffocating. The judge's words cut like a knife. Limited access, supervised visits, and the requirement to prove my stability through counseling and stable employment, I had lost almost everything. The house, our beautiful family home, would be sold, and Mark would retain primary custody of Ethan and Emma. I would only be able to see them every other week, under supervised visits. I had completely destroyed the life I knew with my own hands. Jake had long since left, unsupported and without rescue. Just another chapter in my impulsive story. Those stolen hours in Chicago now feel like the most expensive mistake of my life. Mark takes no pleasure in my misfortune. He doesn't need to. His victory lies in the quiet, orderly way he has rebuilt our family life. Without me, he hired a full-time nanny, enrolled the kids in therapy sessions, and created a stable environment that shows the court and the kids that he is the responsible parent. My first apartment is a small one-bedroom, and every other week I would watch Ethan and Emma interact with me, carefully observing their words and actions, their love. Now they have become cautious and reserved. This lesson is not only about the affair, but also about values, trusting your family and making considered choices. Mark not only won the divorce, but also the respect of his children, showing them what true responsibility is. I lost everything by pursuing a momentary thrill, while he gained everything by choosing stability.